Number 1. Shannon Wayne Agofsky. Shannon Wayne Agofsky received a life sentence without parole for the 1989 murder of Missouri bank president Dan Short. Agofsky and his brother Joseph kidnapped Short at gunpoint during an armed bank robbery in Noel, Missouri. They forced Short to open the bank vault. They duct-taped him to a chair, chained a concrete block to his ankle, and dumped him alive into Oklahoma's Grand Lake. Short drowned slowly while struggling against the ropes and the weight pulling him under. Agofsky was convicted in federal court and later in Oklahoma State Court for that killing. Agofsky arrived at USP Beaumont, Texas, already serving life. On January 5, 2001, he was placed in a 15 by 20-foot chain-link recreation cage with Luther Plant. Plant was 37 years old and serving the 8th year of a 15-year sentence for arson and firearms violations. He had torched a Texas nightclub in 1987. Guard Christopher Matt put both men into the cage that morning. The cages at Beaumont were used to pair segregation inmates for fights. Inmates called them the Thunderdome, or Gladiator School. Prison staff admitted it was routine policy to let rivals face off inside the cages to keep the yard under control. This was the 5th murder at USP Beaumont since it opened in 1997. Video cameras recorded the entire incident. Agofsky was a black belt in Hwarang Do, a Korean martial art. He had trained to use his hands and feet as weapons. Plant muttered something as the two men paced the concrete floor. According to some accounts, Plant lunged first and swung at Agofsky. Agofsky swept Plant's legs out from under him with a kick. Plant hit the concrete floor hard. Agofsky then stomped on Plant's head and neck. Eyewitnesses and the surveillance video showed Agofsky delivering repeated stomps, around 11 times total. He targeted the face, jaw, nose, and throat with full force using his boots. The first stomps cracked Plant's jaw. The next blows shattered his nose and knocked out 4 teeth. Blood poured from Plant's ears, eyes, nostrils, and mouth. Agofsky continued stomping, grinding his heel into the soft tissue under Plant's chin. This crushed the larynx and trachea into pulp. Plant tried to curl into a ball but could not protect himself. Agofsky followed him across the floor, stomping again and again. Internal bleeding filled Plant's lungs, trachea, esophagus, and stomach. Plant drowned in his own blood while lying on the concrete. His arms and legs twitched in spasms. His face swelled into a mangled, bloody mask with hemorrhaging around both eye sockets. A corrections officer testified that Agofsky kept stomping even after Plant lost consciousness. Plant did not raise his hands to defend himself during the final blows. The assault lasted about 10 seconds according to some witnesses, but the stomps were deliberate and repeated. Agofsky then stepped back, breathing normally, and waited calmly for guards to arrive. He made no excited statements and showed no panic. Plant was dragged out on a sled and taken to the hospital. He died nearly 2 hours later. Forensic examiners confirmed the injuries: crushed throat, broken jaw, broken nose, 4 missing teeth, massive head abrasions, and lungs filled with blood. The official cause of death was blunt force trauma, leading to suffocation by drowning in his own blood. Agofsky had bragged in letters and to others about staying in shape and waiting for a chance to test his martial arts skills on another inmate. Prison records showed he had prior misconduct, including threats and violence against other prisoners. One incident involved striking an inmate and then stomping on his head until he was unconscious. Agofsky represented a continuing danger. The federal trial took place in Beaumont in 2004. Jurors watched the surveillance video multiple times. It showed the sweep kick, the fall, and the repeated stomps on the downed man. Defense witnesses claimed self-defense and said Plant attacked first. Some inmates testified that Agofsky stopped after incapacitating Plant and waited without further action. The jury rejected the self-defense claim. They convicted Agofsky on 2 counts for the single killing: murder by a federal prisoner serving a life sentence under 18 USC 1118, and premeditated first-degree murder under 18 USC 1111. During the sentencing phase, prosecutors presented Agofsky's prior murder conviction for killing Dan Short. They proved multiple statutory aggravating factors. Agofsky was over 18 at the time of the offense. He intentionally killed Plant. He intentionally inflicted serious bodily injury resulting in death. He participated in an act with intent that lethal force be used. He engaged in violence knowing it created a grave risk of death to Plant. Additional statutory aggravators included that the murder occurred while Agofsky was serving a life sentence, his prior federal conviction for an offense involving a firearm and resulting in death, and that the killing was especially heinous, cruel, or depraved because it involved serious physical abuse. Non-statutory aggravating factors included Agofsky's continuing danger to others, prior threats and acts of violence in prison, and his lack of remorse. The government argued Agofsky turned the recreation cage into an execution chamber, using only his trained feet and boots. Plant never landed a meaningful blow. The stomps were targeted to destroy the airway and cause prolonged suffering. Plant drowned on dry concrete while his body convulsed. The defense presented mitigating evidence including Agofsky's background and claims about the prison environment that allowed cage fights. The jury considered all factors. After deliberation, they unanimously found that death was the appropriate sentence on both counts. Agofsky received 2 death sentences for the one murder. The Fifth Circuit later required the government to elect which conviction and sentence to keep, but the death penalty stood. Agofsky was transferred to federal death row. He had already proven inside USP Beaumont that he could kill with precision and brutality even under camera surveillance. The video evidence left little doubt about the nature of the attack. Guards admitted the policy of placing inmates together in the cages contributed to the violence. Agofsky exploited that environment. He reduced Luther Plant to a twitching, blood-filled body on the floor in under a minute of stomping. Plant's blood remained visible on the concrete after the body was removed. This was not a spontaneous fight that got out of hand. Agofsky used his martial arts training to drop Plant instantly, and then methodically crushed his head and throat. The repeated heel strikes to the neck area ensured the victim could not breathe properly. Blood flooded the airway. Death came slowly through internal drowning. Agofsky stood by and watched without attempting aid or showing emotion. He had nothing to lose as a lifer and used the opportunity to demonstrate dominance. USP Beaumont housed some of the most violent federal inmates. The recreation cages became known as places where weak inmates could be broken. Agofsky stood out as one of the most dangerous even among them. He arrived with a murder conviction and left with another plus a death sentence. His actions showed calculated brutality. The stomps were not random kicks, but targeted blows designed to inflict maximum damage to the face and airway. Forensic details matched the video: 11 stomps, crushed structures in the neck, massive hemorrhage, and asphyxiation by blood. Agofsky never expressed remorse for killing Plant. He maintained positions on self-defense and appeals, but the facts on the ground were clear from the recording. A trained fighter took down an opponent and then executed him on the floor with boot stomps. Plant's twitching body and mangled face were captured on tape as he died. This case highlighted problems at Beaumont with inmate management and the use of rec cages for conflict resolution. It also showed how a lifer with martial arts skills and prior killing experience could turn a routine prison activity into a fatal assault. Agofsky's kill count inside the system reached 2. The first was a planned drowning of a bound victim. The second was a public stomping that left another man drowning in his own blood on concrete. Both involved prolonged suffering. Both showed premeditation and a willingness to end life without hesitation. In the federal system built to contain the worst offenders, Agofsky earned his place among the most evil through these acts. The jury saw the evidence and chose death as the only fitting response. He remains on death row, a reminder of what happens when a killer with skills and no future decides to strike again. Number 2. Christopher Kramer. On June 9, 2014, at USP Beaumont in Texas, Kramer and Ricky Fackrell stabbed fellow inmate Leo Johns to death inside the housing unit. All 3 men were members of the Soldiers of the Aryan Culture, a white supremacist prison gang. Kramer held the rank of general and Fackrell was the lieutenant. The murder was gang-ordered punishment because Johns had failed to follow orders. The attack was the result of a conspiracy that began in March 2014. Kramer and Fackrell were already serving federal sentences when they planned and carried out the killing. They used homemade weapons to stab Johns repeatedly. The assault took place in the open housing unit of the high-security penitentiary. Johns died from multiple stab wounds. The killing was captured in the investigation as a calculated act of internal gang discipline. Federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Texas charged both men with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. A federal grand jury returned the indictment on March 3, 2016. The case was investigated by the FBI and the Bureau of Prisons Special Investigative Services. Assistant U.S. Attorneys John Kraft and Joseph R. Batt, along with trial attorney Sonia V. Jimenez of the Justice Department's Capital Case Section, prosecuted the matter. The 6-day trial took place before U.S. District Judge Marcia Crone. On May 9, 2018, the jury convicted Kramer and Fackrell of first-degree murder after hearing evidence of the conspiracy, the gang hierarchy, and the brutal nature of the stabbing. During the sentencing phase, the government presented Kramer's and Fackrell's violent histories and the fact that the murder occurred inside a federal prison. Prosecutors argued that both defendants would always remain a danger to others. The jury deliberated for approximately 8 hours before returning death sentences for both men. Judge Crone immediately imposed the sentences. Attorney General Jeff Sessions and U.S. Attorney Joseph D. Brown announced the outcome, stating that the murder was senseless, barbaric violence carried out under a repugnant, hateful ideology. The Department of Justice emphasized that white supremacist prison gangs use violence to enforce their rules even behind bars. Kramer was 36 years old at the time of sentencing and originally from Ogden, Utah. Fackrell was 34 and from Vernal, Utah. Both had lengthy criminal records prior to the Beaumont murder. The soldiers of the Aryan culture operated as a structured gang inside federal facilities, using ranks and orders to maintain control. The killing of Leo Johns was not a spontaneous fight, but a planned execution to punish disobedience. The case demonstrated how gang members continue lethal operations even while serving long federal sentences in maximum security prisons like USP Beaumont. Kramer and Fackrell were convicted under 18 U.S.C. 1111 for first-degree murder within a federal penal institution. The conspiracy count fell under the same statutes governing killings committed by inmates. The jury found the aggravating factors outweighed any mitigation. Those factors included the premeditated nature of the attack, the use of weapons inside the prison, the gang motivation, and the defendant's continuing threat to others. No parole is possible under federal law. The death sentences were the appropriate punishment, according to the government, because the murder happened in a controlled environment where inmates are supposed to be contained. The Beaumont stabbing was one of several high-profile inmate murders at the facility that drew national attention to violence inside the Federal Bureau of Prisons. Kramer's role as the general who directed the hit placed him at the center of the conspiracy. He and Fackrell carried out the orders without hesitation. Leo Johns was targeted specifically because he had violated the gang's internal code. The weapons were manufactured inside the prison, and the attack occurred in an area where other inmates could witness the enforcement of discipline. Federal records confirm Kramer remains on death row following the 2018 verdict. The case was prosecuted as part of the Justice Department's efforts to hold violent prison gang members accountable, even when the victim is another gang member. The announcement by Attorney General Sessions highlighted that such ideology leads directly to criminal acts that cannot be tolerated. Prosecutors presented evidence that Kramer and Fackrell had planned the murder for months before executing it on June 9, 2014. The jury saw the full scope of the gang's operations and the defendants' leadership roles. This was not Kramer's first exposure to the federal system, but it resulted in the ultimate penalty. His conviction and death sentence added to the list of capital cases originating from USP Beaumont. The Eastern District of Texas has handled multiple inmate murders resulting in death penalties. Kramer and Fackrell showed that even inside a penitentiary designed for the most dangerous offenders, they could still coordinate and carry out a lethal gang hit. The 8-hour jury deliberation reflected careful consideration of the evidence before imposing death. The facts of the case come directly from the federal indictment trial testimony and sentencing hearing. Kramer conspired with Fackrell to murder Leo Johns. They stabbed him to death on federal property. The jury convicted them on all counts and sentenced them to death. The Bureau of Prisons and FBI investigation left no doubt about the planning and execution. Kramer's status as general gave him authority to order the killing. The motive was strict internal enforcement of gang rules. Johns died because he failed to comply. Christopher Kramer now sits on federal death row for the murder he committed at USP Beaumont. The 2018 sentences ensure that both he and Fackrell will never be released. The case stands as a clear example of how prison gangs operate with lethal force, regardless of the security level. The soldiers of the Aryan culture used the Beaumont housing unit as their execution ground. Kramer led the conspiracy and participated in the stabbing. The federal system responded with the death penalty after a full trial and unanimous jury decision. The murder of Leo Johns was gang business carried out with knives inside a federal prison. Kramer and his co-defendant paid the highest price the law allows. Number 3. Aurelio Cano Flores. Aurelio Cano Flores is a high-ranking leader of the Gulf Cartel and a former Mexican police officer who used his law enforcement position to enable extreme organized crime violence. Born on May 3, 1972, in Tamaulipas, Mexico, Cano Flores, also known as Yankee and Yayo, began working for the Gulf Cartel around 2001 while serving as an officer with the Federal Judicial Police. He recruited several colleagues from the police into the cartel ranks. Those recruits collected the organization's drug proceeds and protected large shipments of narcotics heading to the U.S.-Mexico border. Cano Flores rose rapidly through the cartel structure. He became the regional boss in Los Guerra, a town in the municipality of Ciudad Miguel Alem, Tamaulipas. He later operated as the Gulf Cartel leader in Camargo, Tamaulipas, just across the border from Roma, Texas. In those roles, he coordinated the shipment of multi-ton quantities of heroin, cocaine, and marijuana into the United States. He worked directly with Los Zetas, the cartel's paramilitary wing formed by ex-Mexican Army commandos. To keep the Gulf Cartel operations running, Cano Flores reportedly intimidated and used violence against rival drug traffickers and Mexican law enforcement officers. He maintained control through that violence and through his ability to leverage his former police connections for protection and intelligence. Cano Flores oversaw Gulf Cartel drug trafficking activities in Camargo, Tamaulipas, including major bulk marijuana procurements. He coordinated the movement of illegal narcotics from Mexico into the United States and the repatriation of narcotic-related proceeds. On March 24, 2010, the U.S. Department of the Treasury sanctioned him under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. That sanction prohibited U.S. citizens and companies from any business activities with him and froze any assets he held in the United States. He was described as a close associate of Zeta bosses Heriberto Lascano and Miguel Trevio Morales, both designated as significant foreign narcotics traffickers. The U.S. Department of State offered a reward of up to $5 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Cano Flores was named in a 2010 U.S. federal indictment, along with 19 other high-ranking members of La Compa, the collective name for the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas. The indictment charged conspiracy to manufacture and distribute 5 kilograms or more of cocaine and 100 kilograms or more of marijuana for importation into the United States in violation of 21 U.S. 959, 960, and 963. Mexican federal police arrested Cano Flores on June 10, 2009. He was in possession of a firearm, a magazine device, and 30 rounds of ammunition at the time of arrest. He was taken into custody without incident. Mexican authorities extradited him to the United States on August 19, 2011, to face the drug conspiracy charges. At the time of extradition, he faced a mandatory minimum of 10 years in prison and a maximum of life imprisonment. Cano Flores stood trial in the U.S. District Court for the District of Columbia. The trial lasted over 2 weeks. On February 26, 2013, a federal jury convicted him of the conspiracy count. He became the highest-ranking Gulf Cartel member to be convicted by a U.S. jury in the past 15 years. On May 13, 2013, U.S. District Judge Barbara Jacobs Rothstein sentenced him to 35 years in prison. In addition to the prison term, the court ordered Cano Flores to forfeit $15 billion in drug proceeds as part of a money judgment. That forfeiture amount reflected the massive scale of the narcotics conspiracy he led. The $15 billion figure made headlines as one of the largest criminal forfeitures in U.S. history tied to a single defendant. On appeal, the D.C. Circuit later required recalculation of the forfeiture under 21 U.S.C. 853A1, but the original $15 billion order underscored the volume of drugs and money that passed through operations under his command. Cano Flores was not a cell block killer inside USP Beaumont or any federal prison. His notoriety stems entirely from his leadership in the Gulf Cartel and the extreme level of organized crime violence that his operations supported. The Gulf Cartel, under leaders like Cano Flores, partnered with Los Zetas to control drug routes through Tamaulipas. That partnership produced years of brutal territorial violence, beheadings, shootings, and intimidation campaigns against rivals police and civilians in Mexico. Cano Flores used his police background to corrupt law enforcement and ensure safe passage for cartel loads. He directed the flow of multi-ton cocaine, heroin, and marijuana shipments that fueled addiction, violence, and death on both sides of the border. Federal prosecutors presented evidence that he began as a corrupt officer, recruiting others into the cartel, collecting proceeds and escorting shipments. He escalated to regional command, where he oversaw procurement coordination and protection rackets. His actions contributed to the cartel's ability to move vast quantities of drugs while using violence to eliminate competition and silence threats from Mexican authorities. After sentencing, Cano Flores was designated to serve his term at FCI Beaumont Low in Texas, part of the federal prison complex in Beaumont. He remains incarcerated there under a 35-year sentence with no parole eligibility under federal guidelines. The conviction and sentence capped a career that started with police corruption and ended with one of the most significant U.S. prosecutions of a Gulf Cartel leader. Cano Flores represented exactly the type of high-level trafficker the U.S. government targeted, a former officer who turned his badge into a tool for cartel expansion. He coordinated shipments that crossed into Texas and beyond, while relying on violence and intimidation to maintain the supply chain. The $15 billion forfeiture order highlighted the profits generated by that violence. Even after extradition conviction and transfer to Beaumont, he stands as proof that cartel leadership does not stop at the border. His operations helped sustain the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas during their most violent years of partnership. The jury heard the evidence of his role in the conspiracy and delivered the guilty verdict. The judge imposed 35 years and the massive forfeiture to strip away the financial gains from the drug empire he helped build and protect. Cano Flores accumulated no additional convictions for prison murders. He did not stomp or ambush inmates like some others housed in the Beaumont complex. His record is built on the streets and border regions of Tamaulipas, where he directed the movement of tons of narcotics and used violence to secure the cartel's dominance. From his time as a police recruiter to his final years as Camargo Plaza boss, he enabled the flow of drugs that generated billions in proceeds. The U.S. indictment tied him directly to the La Compa network. His trial evidence included his recruitment of officers, his coordination of shipments, and his position in the hierarchy. Prosecutors emphasized his continuing role even after rising through the ranks. The 35-year sentence fell below the guidelines maximum, but still ensured he would spend most of his remaining life behind bars. The forfeiture of $15 billion was intended to dismantle the economic foundation of the cartel activities he oversaw. Appeals focused on the exact calculation of that forfeiture, but the conviction itself was upheld. Cano Flores entered federal custody in Beaumont Low after the 2013 sentencing and has remained there serving the term. Federal records list him with the Bureau of Prisons as inmate number associated with the D.C. case. His case is cited as a landmark prosecution against the Gulf Cartel, showing that even high-level leaders operating from Mexican border towns can be brought to justice in U.S. courts. Cano Flores used his police training and connections to betray the system he once served. He turned that knowledge into a weapon for the cartel, moving heroin, cocaine, and marijuana across the Rio Grande, while employing violence to keep rivals at bay. The intimidation and violence he directed or participated in helped the Gulf Cartel and Los Zetas maintain control over key smuggling corridors. That control came at the cost of countless lives lost to cartel wars on the Mexican side. Inside the U.S. system, he faced justice through a jury trial that exposed the full scope of the conspiracy. The $15 billion forfeiture remains one of the largest ever imposed on a cartel figure, reflecting the scale of destruction tied to his leadership. At USP Beaumont Low, he serves out the 35-year term, as a reminder of how deeply cartel corruption penetrated Mexican institutions and how far the U.S. will go to prosecute those responsible for flooding the country with drugs. Aurelio Cano Flores did not kill inside the prison walls, but his outside actions built and sustained a machine of organized violence that left thousands dead across Mexico and the United States. Number 4. Ronald Herron. Born March 30, 1982, in Brooklyn, New York, Herron led the murderous Mad Dogs set of the Blood's Street Gang. The set controlled crack cocaine trafficking in the Gowanus houses and Wyckoff Gardens public housing developments in Brooklyn's Boerum Hill neighborhood. Herron rose to leadership of the gang's drug operation through violence, intimidation, and murder. He used his position to enforce discipline, eliminate rivals, and protect the narcotics enterprise. Federal prosecutors charged him with operating a racketeering enterprise that included murder in aid of racketeering, narcotics, trafficking conspiracies, robbery, and firearms offenses. Herron committed the first murder in 2001. He killed Frederick Brooks, a rival associated with the drug trade. Herron was tried in state court for that killing, but acquitted after witnesses refused to testify due to threats from Herron and his associates. The federal case later included the Brooks murder as one of 3 killings committed in aid of the racketeering enterprise. In 2008, Herron murdered Richard Russo, another rival drug dealer. In 2009, he murdered Victor Zapata in an execution-style killing. All 3 victims were linked to the drug trade in the same Brooklyn housing projects. The murders were carried out to solidify Herron's control, protect the gang's crack cocaine distribution network, and terrorize the community. Prosecutors proved the killings were part of a pattern of violence that supported the ongoing criminal enterprise. Herron also faced charges for 3 attempted murders and 4 conspiracies to murder. These acts targeted rivals and potential informants who threatened the gang's operations. The racketeering count encompassed the full scope of the enterprise, including extortion, robbery, and the use of firearms to maintain power. Herron participated in narcotics trafficking conspiracies, distributing crack cocaine in the Gowanus and Wyckoff areas. The gang's drug sales generated proceeds that funded further violence and expansion. Herron directed members of the murderous Mad Dogs to carry out robberies and enforce collections through intimidation. At trial, Herron's own rap music and videos provided direct evidence against him. He performed under the name Raw Diggs and released amateur videos and songs that boasted about his gang leadership, drug dealing, and violent acts. The lyrics and footage contained literal descriptions of crimes, including references to beating a body, identifying himself as leader of the murderous Mad Dogs, and glorifying the criminal lifestyle that matched the charged offenses. Prosecutors played the videos for the jury and introduced lyrics as admissions rather than fictional art. Herron claimed on the witness stand that the music represented an attempt to pursue a rap career after leaving crime in 2007, following a prior 6-year state prison term for drug dealing. The jury rejected that defense. More than 50 witnesses, including cooperating former gang members, testified about Herron's role as the leader who ordered and participated in the violence. The federal trial in the Eastern District of New York lasted 1 month. On June 26, 2014, the jury convicted Herron on all counts after 1 day of deliberations. The convictions included racketeering conspiracy, 3 counts of murder, in aid of racketeering 3 counts of attempted murder, 4 counts of conspiracy to murder, 2 counts of narcotics distribution, and multiple firearms offenses. The verdict established that Herron used murder and the threat of murder to run a violent drug gang that terrorized Brooklyn public housing. On April 2, 2015, United States District Judge Nicholas G. Garofis sentenced Herron to 12 terms of life in prison plus 105 years. The stacked life sentences reflected the 3 murders, plus the additional violent acts and the continuing criminal enterprise. Herron spoke at sentencing and protested the punishment, but showed no remorse for the victims or their families. Herron had a prior criminal record that included armed robbery as a teenager and the state drug conviction. He used his time in state custody to rise in the Bloods ranks before resuming full leadership upon release. The federal case demonstrated that incarceration did not stop his criminal activity. Instead, he continued directing the murderous mad dogs from inside and outside prison until his 2010 arrest. After the federal conviction, Herron was designated to the federal prison system. He is currently serving the sentence at Adex Florence, the Supermax facility in Colorado. His case remains one of the highest-profile racketeering prosecutions, involving a street gang leader who documented his own crimes through music. The murderous mad dogs under Herron unleashed repeated acts of brutal violence on the Brooklyn community. The 3 murders were not isolated incidents, but part of a calculated strategy to dominate the crack trade in 2 specific housing projects. Witnesses described how Herron and his crew used guns intimidation and targeted killings to eliminate competition and silence threats. The rap videos that once served as self-promotion became the evidence that sealed his fate. Jurors saw and heard Herron boasting about the exact conduct charged in the indictment. The government proved every element of the racketeering enterprise through direct testimony, physical evidence, and Herron's own words. Herron accumulated 3 murder convictions plus multiple attempts and conspiracies, all tied to the same drug gang he led. The total sentence of 12 life terms plus 105 years ensures he will never leave federal custody. The case highlighted how gang leaders who treat public housing as their personal territory can be held accountable under federal RICO statutes. Herron's music career ended with the conviction. The videos that prosecutors used showed him performing while armed and referencing the very murders and drug deals that formed the basis of the charges. He worked with other rappers on tracks, but the jury focused on the factual content of the lyrics that matched the timeline and details of the crimes. Federal records list Herron under his true name, with the convictions stemming from the 2010 indictment in the Eastern District of New York. The enterprise operated for years, controlling cocaine and heroin markets through fear. Herron personally participated in or directed the violence that kept the operation running. The 3 victims, Frederick Brooks, Richard Russo, and Victor Zapata, were all eliminated because they posed threats to the gang's profits or authority. The pattern repeated with the attempted murders and conspiracies, showing Herron's willingness to kill or order killings repeatedly. The sentencing judge noted the lack of empathy and the calculated nature of the crimes when imposing the maximum penalty. This record makes Ronald Herron one of the most violent gang leaders prosecuted in federal court in New York. He turned music into a confession tape and used murder as a business tool. The Bloods set he commanded answered to him and carried out the racketeering acts that resulted in 3 dead bodies and a community held in fear. The jury convicted him on every count presented. The sentence of 12 life terms plus 105 years matches the scale of the destruction he caused. Herron entered the federal system as a convicted murderer and racketeer and remains there with no possibility of release. His case stands as proof that boasting about crimes in videos and lyrics can be used to secure convictions when the facts align exactly with the evidence. The 3 murders were committed in aid of the same criminal enterprise that generated the drug proceeds and required constant enforcement through violence. Herron built and led that enterprise until federal authorities dismantled it with the RICO prosecution. Herron had no additional killings inside federal prison. His body count of 3 was established through street-level gang violence before his final arrest. The federal system contained him after the 2014 conviction and the 2015 sentencing. He was transferred through high-security facilities before reaching Adex Florence, where the most dangerous federal inmates are housed. The rap evidence that convicted him included specific references to the gang's code and the acts of violence he claimed credit for. Prosecutors presented over 50 witnesses who corroborated the lyrics with first-hand accounts of the murders and drug operations. The defense called character witnesses, including another rapper, but could not overcome the direct admissions and testimony. The unanimous guilty verdict on all counts left no doubt about Herron's leadership role and personal involvement in the killings. The Gowanus and Wyckoff Gardens projects became the territory where Herron's gang operated with impunity until the federal indictment. Residents lived under the threat of the murderous mad dogs, who used robbery, extortion, and murder to maintain control of the crack trade. Herron directed those activities while recording music that celebrated the same lifestyle. The trial exposed the full operation, including how Herron used associates to dispose of weapons and intimidate witnesses after each killing. The 2001 Brooks murder was retried federally because the earlier state acquittal resulted from the same witness intimidation tactics that defined the enterprise. Each murder served the same purpose: to protect the narcotics conspiracy that formed the core of the racketeering charges. Herron's sentence ensures permanent removal from society. The 12 life terms cover the racketeering count, the 3 murders and related violent acts, while the additional 105 years account for the firearms, narcotics, and conspiracy convictions. He remains incarcerated under that judgment. The case is documented in federal court records from the Eastern District of New York and cited as an example of using a defendant's own artistic output as evidence of real crimes. Ronald Herron, aka Raw Diggs, aka Big Mike, built a reputation as a rapper on the foundation of 3 murders and a violent drug empire. The federal jury and judge determined that those crimes warranted the harshest possible punishment under the law. He killed to maintain power, and he documented it for the world to see until that documentation helped send him to prison for the rest of his life. Number 5. Conrad Edward Ned. Ned was 41 years old when federal prosecutors charged him with murder on February 5, 2026. A grand jury in the Eastern District of Texas returned an indictment naming Ned, along with 3 other inmates, Jeremy Crow, age 32, Ramon James Ibarra, age 35, also known as Apache, and Curtis Ray McClendon, age 43. The charge stems from a single incident on November 21, 2025, at the Federal Correctional Complex in Beaumont, Texas. The 4 men were involved in an altercation that resulted in the death of another federal inmate housed at the facility. The indictment alleges Ned and the co-defendants participated in the altercation that caused the fatal injury. Federal authorities have not released additional details on the exact manner of the killing or the victim's identity in the public charging documents. The case is being investigated by the FBI and the Bureau of Prisons. Assistant U.S. Attorney John B. Ross is prosecuting. If convicted, each defendant faces a maximum of life in federal prison under the applicable statutes for murder committed in a federal penal institution. Ned had no prior documented homicide convictions at the time of the indictment. His involvement marks the most recent high-profile murder case inside the Beaumont federal complex. The incident occurred inside a facility that houses some of the most violent federal offenders serving long sentences. Ned was already incarcerated at the complex when the altercation took place. The grand jury found probable cause that the 4 inmates acted in a way that caused the death during the confrontation. Under 18 U.S.C. 1111, the federal murder statute applies to killings within federal jurisdiction, including prisons. The charge does not require proof of premeditation for second-degree murder, but the government can pursue first-degree if evidence supports it. The indictment treats all 4 defendants equally on the murder count. No separate gang enhancement or additional charges were detailed in the public filing. Ned and the others remain in federal custody pending further proceedings. The case has not yet gone to trial. No plea agreements or sentencing outcomes have been reported as of the indictment date. Federal prosecutors announced the charges through the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Texas. The statement emphasized that a federal indictment is not evidence of guilt, and that all defendants are presumed innocent until proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt at trial. Ned's role in the November 21, 2025 altercation places him among the most recent inmates charged with killing inside USP Beaumont, or the broader FCC Beaumont complex. The facility has recorded multiple inmate deaths from violence in recent years, but this case resulted in a multi-defendant federal murder indictment within months of the incident. The 4 men were housed in the high-security environment designed to contain dangerous offenders. The altercation qualifies as prison murder under federal law because it occurred on Bureau of Prisons property while all involved were serving federal sentences. The government must prove that the defendants caused the death either intentionally or with reckless disregard in the course of the confrontation. Court records show the grand jury returned the indictment after reviewing evidence presented by the FBI and BOP investigators. The probe included witness statements from other inmates and staff review of any available video or physical evidence from the scene. No specifics on weapons or the number of blows have been made public. The victim was transported for medical treatment, but did not survive. The exact time of death and cause listed in the autopsy have not been disclosed in the charging documents or press releases. This marks Ned's first known homicide charge in the federal system. Prior to the 2025 incident, he had no public record of prison killings. His co-defendants Ybarra Crow and McClendon are similarly charged only in connection with this event. The case highlights ongoing violence inside the Beaumont complex, where segregation units and recreation areas have seen repeated conflicts. Federal law treats inmate-on-inmate murder as a serious offense, carrying the highest penalty short of the death penalty, which is not sought here. Prosecutors did not file a notice of intent to seek death, so the maximum exposure remains life without parole if convicted. Ned and the three others were already classified as high-security inmates prior to the indictment. Their transfer or continued housing at Beaumont will depend on BOP classification reviews after the charges. The Eastern District of Texas has jurisdiction because the killing occurred within its territory. Trial would take place in Beaumont or a nearby federal courthouse if the case proceeds. Defense attorneys have not made public statements on the allegations as of the indictment announcement. The government has not released mugshots or additional biographical details on Ned beyond his age and alias. The November 21, 2025 altercation qualifies under federal statutes as murder by a person in custody. It does not require the victim to be a specific target, only that the act caused the death. Ned's participation as one of four charged makes him a central figure in the prosecution. The case remains active with no trial date set. If convicted, Ned would receive a life sentence to run consecutive to any existing term he is already serving. The indictment stands as the sole documented homicide linked to him in available federal records. Federal authorities moved quickly from the incident to indictment within roughly 2.5 months. The FBI and BOP conducted the joint investigation, focusing on the four named inmates. No other suspects were charged. The altercation involved multiple participants, but the grand jury determined these four bore responsibility for the fatal outcome. Ned faces the same potential life sentence as his co-defendants. The charge carries no parole eligibility under federal guidelines. This case adds to the list of inmate murders prosecuted in the Eastern District, stemming from Beaumont facilities. Ned remains presumed innocent. The facts alleged in the indictment describe a single violent altercation on November 21, 2025, that ended one life inside a federal prison. No additional victims or prior killings are attributed to him in the charging documents or public records. The prosecution will rely on evidence gathered at the scene and from cooperating witnesses to prove the elements of murder beyond a reasonable doubt. Ned and the others were identified through BOP records and the investigation as the individuals involved. The case is the most recent federal murder indictment tied directly to violence at the Beaumont complex. Number 6. Justin Volpe. On August 9, 1997, Volpe, a New York City police officer, carried out one of the most extreme acts of brutality in modern law enforcement history. Volpe and other officers arrested 30-year-old Abner Louima, a Haitian immigrant, after a fight outside Club Rendezvous in East Flatbush, Brooklyn. Volpe mistakenly believed Louima had punched him during the disturbance. Officers transported Louima to the 70th Precinct station house in handcuffs. In the patrol car, Volpe struck Louima while he remained handcuffed. At the station house, Volpe and another officer took Louima to a bathroom. Volpe sodomized Louima by forcing the handle of a broken broomstick into his rectum. Volpe then shoved the same bloody stick into Louima's mouth. The assault perforated Louima's rectum and bladder. Louima suffered massive internal injuries. He required 3 major surgeries and spent weeks hospitalized. The attack caused permanent physical damage. Volpe threatened to kill Louima if he ever told anyone about the assault. Volpe borrowed gloves from another officer before the attack. After the sodomy, Volpe walked through the station house carrying the broomstick covered in blood and feces. He boasted about the act to fellow officers. Federal prosecutors charged Volpe with multiple counts of violating Louima's civil rights under 18 U.S. 242. The indictment included conspiracy to commit aggravated assault and aggravated sexual abuse assault in the patrol car, sexual abuse in the restroom, assault on another Haitian bystander, Patrick Antoine, false arrest of Antoine, and witness tampering. Volpe initially pleaded not guilty. His federal trial began in the Eastern District of New York in 1999. On May 25, 1999, midway through the government's case, Volpe changed his plea to guilty on 6 counts. He admitted ramming the broomstick into Luima's rectum and mouth. He admitted striking Luima in the patrol car. He admitted the death threat. U.S. District Judge Eugene Nickerson sentenced Volpe on December 13, 1999, to 30 years in federal prison without parole. The sentence included a $525 fine and $277,495 in restitution to Luima. Under federal sentencing guidelines, Volpe's total offense level reached 42, which normally called for life imprisonment. The judge reduced it after considering the risk that Volpe, as a former cop, would face constant violence and abuse from other inmates in prison. Volpe served his 30-year term in multiple high-security federal facilities. He was housed at FCI Beaumont Low in Texas, part of the Federal Correctional Complex in Beaumont. As a convicted former NIPT officer who had sodomized a handcuffed prisoner with a broomstick, Volpe lived under constant threat. Inmates targeted him because of his law enforcement background and the nature of the crime. The Beaumont facility held some of the most violent federal offenders. Volpe's status as a cop made him a marked man. In 2021, while incarcerated at Beaumont, Volpe filed a motion for compassionate release citing COVID-19 exposure, lack of medical treatment, mold in the facility, and close quarters. Federal prosecutors opposed the motion, stating that the premeditated, brutal, and brazen nature of the broomstick assault justified the full sentence. The request was denied. Volpe served approximately 24 years before early release. On June 13, 2023, the Bureau of Prisons transferred him from FCI Sandstone in Minnesota to community confinement in a residential reentry management program. His full sentence was scheduled to end on January 10, 2024. The Bureau cited privacy, safety, and security reasons for withholding further details of the release. Volpe had no additional criminal convictions beyond the Luima case. The 1997 assault stood alone as the basis for his federal imprisonment. The broomstick sodomy caused Luima lifelong injuries. He underwent multiple operations to repair the damage to his colon, bladder, and internal organs. The case exposed systemic problems in the NIPD and led to major reforms in precinct procedures, oversight, and training. Volpe's actions resulted in no deaths, but produced extreme and deliberate suffering. The federal case focused exclusively on the civil rights violations from the August 9, 1997 incident. Other officers faced related charges for the beating and attempted cover-up, but Volpe was the principal actor in the sexual torture. Sentencing records show Judge Nickerson weighed the heinous nature of the crime against Volpe's risk of prison violence due to his former police status. The 30-year term reflected the severity of the aggravated sexual abuse, even without a homicide. Volpe expressed limited remorse during the plea hearing. The judge emphasized that the attack was premeditated and carried out while Luima was in custody and defenseless. Volpe's presence in federal pens like Beaumont placed him among the worst federal inmates. His cop background, combined with the specifics of the broomstick rape, made him one of the most despised individuals in the system. Inmates frequently assaulted or threatened former law enforcement officers. Volpe survived his incarceration despite those risks. Federal Bureau of Prisons records confirm Volpe's time at Beaumont Low. The facility housed him with high-security offenders serving long sentences. The constant threat of retaliation stemmed directly from his identity as the officer who committed the infamous assault. Volpe completed the overwhelming majority of his sentence before the 2023 transfer to supervision. The Luima case remains a landmark example of in-custody police brutality. Volpe's conviction and 30-year term demonstrated federal accountability for the crime. He entered the system as a disgraced patrolman and served his time in environments where his safety was never guaranteed. The broomstick attack left Abner Luima with irreversible harm, while Volpe faced the consequences through decades in federal custody, including at Beaumont. Volpe had no prior homicide or additional violence convictions. The entire federal prosecution rested on the single night of extreme brutality in the 70th precinct. The guilty plea avoided a full trial on all 12 original counts. Prosecutors presented evidence including medical records, witness statements, and Volpe's own admissions. The restitution order acknowledged Luima's medical costs and suffering. Volpe's time in Beaumont highlighted the challenges faced by former officers in the general prison population. His case file notes the premeditated use of the broomstick and the death threat as aggravating factors. The sentence ensured he spent most of his adult life behind bars. Volpe was released under supervision after serving the bulk of the 30 years. The facts of the assault remain unchanged. A handcuffed man sodomized with a wooden handle causing organ perforation and multiple surgeries. Volpe carried out the act in uniform inside a police station. The federal system held him accountable and placed him in facilities like Beaumont, where the inmate population enforced its own code against former police. Number 7. Juan Carlos Rivas Moriera. Juan Carlos Rivas Moriera, also known as Stocky. Born around 1980 in El Salvador, he was already serving a life sentence for prior MS-13 racketeering and murder convictions when he led the January 31, 2022 attack at USP Beaumont. Rivas Moriera held high rank inside MS-13. The gang's leadership in El Salvador, known as the Ranfla Nacional, had ordered a break from the long-standing alliance with the Mexican Mafia and Surrios. The orders were to attack former allies and seize control inside federal prisons. On January 31, 2022, at approximately 1:23 p.m., in the AA housing unit, 7 MS-13 members, including Rivas Moriera, carried out the coordinated hit. Rivas Moriera began the assault. He approached Guillermo Riojas, age 54, from behind and stabbed him twice in the chest. Riojas fell immediately. The other MS-13 members joined in stabbing and kicking Riojas while he lay motionless on the floor. Riojas died from 3 stab wounds, 2 that pierced his heart and 1 to his lung. He also suffered additional injuries to his head and stomach. The group then chased down Andrew Pineda, age 34. They cornered him, beat him, and stabbed him repeatedly. Pineda was stabbed 46 times 20 wounds to the front of his body and 26 to the back. He bled to death on the prison floor. 2 other Surrios members were stabbed during the attack, but survived their serious injuries and were rushed to the hospital. The entire assault lasted approximately 8 minutes. Blood covered the housing unit. The attack was not random. It was a planned operation to enforce the new orders from El Salvador and eliminate rival gang members inside the federal system. Federal prosecutors in the Eastern District of Texas indicted Rivas Moriera and the 6 co-defendants on April 7, 2022. The 15-count indictment charged racketeering conspiracy, multiple counts of violent acts in aid of racketeering causing death in a federal facility, and conspiracy to commit those acts. On July 2, 2024, Rivas Moriera pleaded guilty to avoid the death penalty. On April 25, 2025, Judge Dabney L. McLaughlin sentenced him to an additional life sentence without the possibility of parole. The new life term runs consecutive to the life sentence he was already serving. He was 45 years old at sentencing. His co-defendants received sentences ranging from 30 years to life. The Bureau of Prisons responded to the killings by ordering a nationwide lockdown of the entire federal prison system for almost 1 week. The lockdown was unprecedented and affected every federal facility in the country, while officials assessed the threat from MS-13's organized violence behind bars. Rivas Moriera had entered USP Beaumont already serving life for earlier MS-13 murders and racketeering in the Washington, D.C. area. The Beaumont attack showed he continued to lead lethal operations from inside maximum security federal prison. He personally initiated the violence by stabbing Riojas twice in the chest. The rest of the squad followed his lead, finishing Riojas on the ground, then hunting down and overkilling Pineda with 46 stab wounds. The victims were targeted solely because of their Surrios and Mexican Mafia ties. The case was prosecuted as part of the Justice Department's efforts to dismantle MS-13's racketeering enterprise inside the federal prison system. Court records confirm Rivas Moriera's role as the leader who started the assault. The 8-minute attack produced 2 dead bodies, 2 attempted murders, and forced the entire BOP into lockdown. Prosecutors proved the killings were committed in aid of the MS-13 racketeering conspiracy under direct orders from the Ronfla Nacional in El Salvador. Rivas Moriera now serves multiple stacked life sentences in federal custody. He will never be released. The Beaumont double murder added 2 more confirmed kills to his record while he was already serving life. The attack demonstrated that MS-13's command structure operates across borders and inside prison walls. Riojas and Pineda were butchered in open view of other inmates. The shanks used were manufactured inside the facility. Blood remained on the housing unit floor after the bodies were removed. This was the incident that triggered the nationwide federal prison lockdown in 2022. Rivas Moriera's guilty plea and additional life sentence closed the case. The facts were established through the indictment trial evidence and sentencing hearing. He led 7 MS-13 members in the coordinated stabbing that left 2 men dead and 2 more seriously wounded. The motive was gang power. The method was repeated knife attacks on defenseless targets. The result was 2 bodies on the floor and a system-wide security response that shut down every federal prison for days. Juan Carlos Rivas Moriera, aka Stocky, remains incarcerated under multiple life sentences. The federal system has him contained, but the killings at USP Beaumont proved he could still direct and participate in murders. While locked inside one of the country's highest security penitentiaries, the 2 victims died from the precise stab wounds he started and the overkill that followed. No parole, no release. He will die in federal prison for the 2 men he helped butcher on January 31, 2022.